Good evening. Just yesterday, the Supreme Court of Texas, they ruled that Facebook could in fact be held liable if their platform is used by sex traffickers to prey on children. Meanwhile, 3 days ago, the FDA added a warning to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, informing consumers that there is a risk of developing heart inflammation. And lastly, over in Arizona, the House out there, lawmakers in the House passed a new bill which would require schools across the state to teach students about the evils of communism. Let's go through these stories together. This is your semi-daily Facts Matter update, and I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Now let's begin today's discussion by talking about vaccines. But actually, as a super quick aside, at the very top of the description box is a link to Epoch TV. It's our brand new no-censorship video platform where you can find all of the awesome Epoch Times video programs like The Larry Elder Show, Crossroads with Joshua Phillip, American Thought Leaders, China in Focus, Life and Times, and our show Facts Matter. And on there you will find exclusive episodes that you will not find here on YouTube. In fact, we just published an exclusive episode on there earlier today. So again, that link will be right there at the top. Hope you check it out. And now let's really talk about vaccines. 3 days ago, the FDA, they announced that they will be adding a warning to the Moderna and Pfizer COVID vaccines, informing consumers that there is a risk of developing heart inflammation. Now, this decision came after the CDC, which stands for the Centers for Disease Control, after they reported that more cases of heart inflammation, which includes either myocarditis or pericarditis, were found among young adults as well as children after they received the vaccines. In a statement released by the FDA, which is right here, I have it in my hands, they said that they will be adding some revisions to their vaccine fact sheets about, quote, the increased risks of myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle, and pericarditis, inflammation of the tissue surrounding the heart following vaccination. Furthermore, it says that there may be an increased risks, particularly following the second dose and with the onset of symptoms within a few days after vaccination. Now, it's worth noting that this warning only applies to the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines, which use mRNA technology and require 2 doses. However, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which uses an adenovirus and only requires 1 dose, is not included in this new warning. Also, the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Janet Woodcock, she released a statement arguing that the risks of developing heart inflammation are outweighed by the benefits of the vaccine. Here's what she said as a part of her statement. The risk of myocarditis and pericarditis appears to be very low given the number of vaccine doses that have been administered. The benefits of COVID-19 vaccination continue to outweigh the risks, given the risk of COVID-19 diseases and related potentially severe complications. Now, in terms of the raw numbers, according to the latest findings from the CDC, which were released about a week ago, there have been over 1,200 cases of heart inflammation in individuals who are aged 30 years or younger after they received their vaccine doses. And based on the submissions to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, which is operated by both the FDA and the CDC, this rate of heart inflammation is higher than what was expected for young males. According to that data, for males between the ages of 12 and 17, the expected number of heart inflammation cases following their first vaccine dose were between 2 and 21. However, the observed number of heart inflammation cases was 32. And then, for males between the ages of 18 and 24, the expected number of cases were between 3 and 34. However, the observed number of cases was 47. Now, in terms of what the symptoms are, as well as what you should do if you're experiencing them, here's what the FDA said as a part of their statement. Quote, vaccine recipients should seek medical attention right away if they have chest pain, shortness of breath, or feelings of having a fast beating, fluttering, or pounding heart after vaccination. The FDA and CDC are monitoring the reports, collecting more information, and will follow up to assess longer-term outcomes over several months. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we reached out to both Pfizer and Moderna for comment, but we have yet to hear back. If you would like to read more about these findings, if you would like to comb through the data for yourself, or if you would like to read this full warning from the FDA, the links to all that will be in the description box below this video for you to check out. And now let's move on over and talk about sex trafficking on Facebook. Oh, sorry. Hello? Hey, Roman, it's me. No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to take a quick moment and introduce our sponsor for today's episode, which is an awesome company called AMAC, or AMAC, and it stands for the Association of Mature American Citizens. Now, I do consider myself a mature American citizen, but I'm about 19 years too young to join AMAC. However, if you or someone in your family is 50 years old or over, I would consider joining because they are essentially the conservative alternative to the AARP, and they offer 3 main benefits to their members. The first is the money-saving benefit because they partner with a ton of retailers across the country and offer you discounts on things like vitamins, insurance policies, and so on. The list is pretty long. I'll throw a link to it in the description box below. The second is that members get a subscription to their magazine. And even though I'm not a member, I have read their magazine, and it's filled with thought-provoking articles. Very good. I'd highly recommend it. And then the third benefit, which a lot of people say is their favorite, is that AMAC fights on Capitol Hill against what they're calling the socialist storm that's brewing in America. So again, I would highly recommend you check them out. It's not too expensive. It's only $16 per year, but it looks like the benefits outweigh the cost by a wide margin. Again, you can go over to amac.us/factsmatter or just click in the link in the description box below. And AMAC, thank you so much for sponsoring our episode. Now, Roman in the studio, back to you. And now let's move on over to Texas, where a lot of things are happening. To start with, just yesterday, the Texas Supreme Court, they ruled that Facebook could in fact be held liable if their platform is used by sex traffickers to prey on children. Now, to give you a bit of background on this case, there were 3 different lawsuits that came out of the Houston area, which involved teenage victims of sex trafficking who alleged that they met their abusers through Facebook's messaging service. The prosecution in the case also argued that Facebook was negligent by not doing more to block sex traffickers from using their site. And after the case went through the entire state court system, the Texas Supreme Court ultimately agreed with the prosecution and said in part that Facebook should not be some kind of lawless no man's land. Here's specifically what they said as a part of their ruling. We do not understand Section 230 to create a lawless no man's land on the internet in which states are powerless to impose liability on websites that knowingly or intentionally participate in the evil of online human trafficking. Now, I want to pause here for a moment. They mentioned Section 230 in this ruling. And so for your reference, Facebook was actually arguing that they were protected under Section 230 of the Federal Communications Decency Act. This is the law that's responsible for these social media companies being recognized as platforms rather than publishers. And it effectively shields these social media companies from being liable for the content that people put on their platforms. However, critics, of course, have been saying for a very long time that these social media companies are misusing this rule to get immunity from being liable for anything, while at the same time acting as a publisher when they censor conservative viewpoints. And then some go further and argue that if they work to censor sex trafficking content as much as they censor conservative content, then the problem could be solved. Regardless, let's get back to this ruling. It says, holding internet platforms accountable for words or actions of their users is one thing, and the federal precedent uniformly dictates that Section 230 does not allow it. Holding internet platforms accountable for their own misdeeds is quite another thing. This is particularly the case for human trafficking. Now, this decision does not actually mean that Facebook has been found guilty of any crimes, but it does mean that these sex trafficking victims can move forward with their lawsuits against Facebook, which they will now do. And I want to point out that this is a fairly significant ruling, because according to this report right here, which is the 2020 Federal Human Trafficking Report, and it came out of an organization called the Human Trafficking Institute, and this report says in the year 2020, 59% of people who were recruited into sex trafficking were recruited on Facebook. Again, let me just reiterate that. Of the active sex trafficking cases from the year 2020, this report says that 59% of the victims were recruited on Facebook. According to this report, it says that this makes Facebook, quote, by far the most frequently referenced website or app in public sources connected with these prosecutions, which was also true in 2019. Now, after the Texas Supreme Court made their ruling, a spokesman for Facebook, he went on to Fox News and made this statement. We're reviewing the decision and considering potential next steps. Sex trafficking is abhorrent and not allowed on Facebook. We will continue our fight against the spread of this content and the predators who engage in it. Now, we here at the Epoch Times, we also reached out to Facebook with some more questions, but we have yet to hear back. However, while we're talking about Texas, as well as about the topic of sex crimes generally, I'd like to discuss another topic based on this report, which was just released. According to this data set, which was released by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency, the number of sex offenders who have been arrested at the southern border trying to cross illegally has increased by 542%. And worse yet, a large number of these people who have been detained had prior convictions for crimes involving a minor. Now, in terms of the raw numbers, in 2019, 58 criminal sex offenders were apprehended at the southern border. In 2020, it was 156. And in 2021, which is only halfway through, border agents have already arrested 353 illegal aliens with sex-related criminal convictions. Now, it's really worth pointing out that these numbers are for the people who have actually been apprehended. In fact, according to the new director of Border Patrol, Mr. Raul Ortiz, he said that just this year alone, they have detected more than 250,000 illegal aliens who were able to evade capture. They were detected, but they were able to escape. And it's also very difficult to calculate how many people evaded Border Patrol without getting detected. And so again, this 542% increase in the number of sex offenders who have been apprehended are only those who have been detected and captured. Now, in terms of what happens to them once they have actually been apprehended, here's what Mr. Ortiz said. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't read a paper or a report from my agents that talk about criminal aliens, sexual offenders that they've apprehended out there. Those folks aren't getting released in these communities. Guess what happens to them? They go to jail. When they get out of jail, they go back to their country of origin. Now, I would like to take a moment and focus on the Del Rio sector of the border, because at the moment, we have one of our reporters there right now. Not too long ago, Del Rio was relatively quiet in terms of illegal border crossings. However, recently, it has become the second busiest in all of Texas, trailing only behind the Rio Grande Valley. Here's what the chief of the Del Rio sector, Mr. Austin Scaro, here's what he said a few days ago. We've seen a tremendous increase. So far this year, this fiscal year today, we've caught 144,000 people in the Del Rio sector. We've gone through this before. We've seen these increases, these surges for the last 30 to 40 years. It's never been this bad. I'll tell you that straight up. I've never seen it this bad. He then went on to say that in his sector, there has been a 1,400% increase in the number of sex offenders arrested by Border Patrol agents. In his sector, it's a 1,400% increase. And of course, these are just statistics, but they have real-world effects. For instance, a Texas resident who lives down there near the U.S. southern border, he said during a public hearing that prior to January of this year, he had seen only 2 illegal aliens pass through his backyard. However, he said that now he's seeing hundreds of them daily. Here's specifically what he said. I have 4 daughters. Does it concern me when you say there's a 1,400% increase in sex offenders? Yes, it concerns me. I'm concerned about the single men who are running through my backyard, sneaking, and I'm about a 50% success rate on whether or not I get an agent to come out to my place when I call. And when they do, it's awesome. They bring helicopters, they bring support. Otherwise, I'm sitting there unarmed and there's a guy soaking wet in my backyard screaming at me in Spanish. I don't know what to do with this guy. He then went on to ask Border Patrol if they can provide some kind of a training for people in Texas who live near the border and who have to deal with these types of situations. And in response, the Border Patrol sector chief, he said that they should not be engaging with these illegal aliens, that they should instead call Border Patrol, and then he said this. We're going to come just as soon as we can. Sometimes it will be immediate. Sometimes it might take us an hour. Now, the state of Texas has actually increased their response to this growing surge in illegal crossings. For instance, starting in March of this year, Greg Abbott, who is the governor of Texas, he said that he was no longer going to be waiting for the federal government to give assistance, and he began to send extra law enforcement resources down to the border. Additionally, state troopers, they've been involved in 340 vehicle pursuits along the U.S. southern border, as well as 630 vehicle bailouts. And a vehicle bailout is when a vehicle is pulled over by law enforcement and the illegal immigrants who are inside, they scatter and flee to avoid being captured. Furthermore, 3 weeks ago, Governor Abbott, he issued a state of disaster declaration, and he said this. We're going to start making arrests, sending a message to anyone thinking about coming here. You're not getting a free pass. You're getting a straight pass to a jail cell. And along that line, last week, a prison unit over in Dilley, which is a city in Texas, it began to be emptied out in order to make room for illegal alien criminals. However, it's worth noting that while Texas can arrest illegal aliens, they can't actually deport them because that is a federal issue. And so we'll just have to wait and see how effective their new approach will be. Now, if you have a Twitter account, I would highly recommend that you follow Charlotte. She's our on-the-ground reporter who's down in Texas right now. And she often gets interviews with local ranchers, as well as going on ride-alongs with sheriffs, and she gets a lot of great first-hand footage. You can follow her over on Twitter. I'll throw a link to her Twitter account in the description box below in order to get access to that awesome footage. Also, if you'd like to go deeper with any of the stories that we discussed thus far, such as the Texas Supreme Court decision about Facebook or about the dramatic increase in illegal aliens, especially those who are sex offenders, all those links will be down in the description box for you to check out. And also, by the way, that is that same little description box that is right below that like button that I hope you take a moment to smash. Because it goes without saying that videos that are like this, talking honestly about what is happening in this country and in this world right now, are routinely censored or throttled by big tech giants like YouTube. However, when you smash that like button, you are forcing the YouTube algorithm to share this video out to potentially thousands of more people, letting the truth be known far and wide. Also, by the way, if you don't subscribe to this channel already, I would highly recommend subscribing. That way you can get these type of honest news contents delivered directly to your YouTube feed whenever we release them. And now let's talk a little bit about the evils of communism. 3 days ago, the Arizona State House approved a bill which would mandate that school teachers across the entire state must share stories with their students from people who have fled communism. This bill, which is officially known as House Bill 2898, says, among several other things, that public schools will be required to teach, quote, a comparative discussion of political ideologies such as communism and totalitarianism, the conflict with the principles of freedom and democracy essential to the founding principles of the United States. Furthermore, this new bill would actually require that Arizona's Department of Education, it must develop new standards for civic education for students, which includes teaching them about the original intent of America's founding documents, the principles of the United States, as well as the expectation that American citizens will be responsible for preserving and defending, and here's what it says, quote, the blessings of liberty inherited from prior generations and secured by the United States Constitution. And then furthermore, as we mentioned in the beginning, this bill would also require that schools share stories from people who have fled from communist countries. Specifically, this bill says that the Board of Education will have to develop a list of oral history resources that provides patriotism based on first-person accounts of victims of other nations' governing philosophies who can compare those philosophies with those of the United States. Now, in regards to why this bill is necessary, Arizona State Representative Jake Hoffman, he's a Republican, he said this. The reality is that one of the greatest threats facing the globe today is communism and totalitarianism. We have governments, like the communist Chinese government, that their stated goal is to be the world's sole and only superpower, and that they will achieve that goal through any means possible. This bill is now on its way to the Arizona Senate, where it will be debated and voted upon. Now, what's interesting to note is that this bill actually passed the Arizona House just a few days after Florida's governor, Ron DeSantis, signed an executive order on education, which, among several other things, also requires that students in Florida be taught about the evils of communism. In explaining why it's so important to teach students about communism, here's what Ron DeSantis had to say. We want all students to understand the difference. Why would somebody flee across shark-infested waters? Why would people leave these countries and risk their lives to be able to come here? It's important that students understand that. Now, these actions in Florida and Arizona come at a time when the young people in America have more and more begun to accept both socialism and communism as a viable alternative to our own constitutional republic. In fact, there was a recent poll conducted by YouGov which showed that 44% of young Americans, who are millennials, would prefer to live in a socialist society. In that same poll, it found that an additional 7% of respondents said that they would prefer to live in a communist society. And when you combine those together, it means that 51% of millennials say that they would prefer to live under either socialism or communism. Now, from my own experience, so take it for what it's worth, this is due in large part to the fact that young people are not taught about either the history or the atrocities of communism. And so what I've seen is that a lot of young people, they assume that guys like Lenin and Stalin, that they campaigned on a platform of famines, purges, and gulags in order to get into power. But the reality, and this is what's not taught, is that those communist dictators, they actually campaigned on a platform of equality and redistribution of wealth. But people just don't know that. And furthermore, due to a lack of understanding of communism, as well as the failure of America's media to expose it accurately, people really don't understand what is happening in China right now under the Chinese Communist Party. And therefore, you sometimes get some unbelievable statements, like what the CEO of Nike said just a few days ago. If you haven't heard, this is what he said. Nike is a brand that is of China and for China. Now that is quite a statement. Now, on the one hand, you can understand where he's coming from. I mean, China has a huge population. They have a population of 1.4 billion people, and each of those people have, on average, 2 feet. So that's a lot of sneakers that he can sell to them. And of course, there's also cheap labor in China. However, China is not a normal country. China is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, which is a totalitarian dictatorship which engages in some of the worst human rights abuses of this century. The State Department even officially recognizes that they are engaging in a genocide over in the Xinjiang region. But while some people see genocide and concentration camps, others see cheap labor and vocational facilities. Here's what Senator Marco Rubio had to say on this matter. For far too long, companies like Nike and Apple and Amazon and Coca-Cola were using forced labor. They were benefiting from forced labor or sourcing from suppliers that were suspected of using forced labor. These companies, sadly, were making all of us complicit in these crimes. And so, perhaps as more students are taught about the evils of communism, both historically and at present, maybe there will be more of a pushback against the communist dictatorship which currently rules the most populous nation on earth. Now, if you'd like to read more about what's happening over in China or about this new anti-communist education over in Arizona and Florida, those links will be down in the description box for you to check out. And now lastly, as we already mentioned on several previous episodes, on the very same day that Joe Biden was sworn into office, YouTube made the unilateral decision to demonetize our program. We can now no longer run any ads before, during, or after episodes, and the super chat feature has just been disabled. And by the way, that is outside of any type of censorship or throttling that we have always been experiencing on this program. But we here at the Epoch Times, we took action and we created something very cool. It's called Epoch TV. It's our brand new no censorship video platform where you can find all of the awesome Epoch Times video content, such as The Larry Elder Show, American Thought Leaders, Crossroads with Joshua Phillip, Counterpunch with Trevor Loudon, China in Focus, Life and Times, The Nation Speaks, and our show Facts Matter. And on there you will find exclusive episodes that you will not be finding here on YouTube. In fact, we just published a new exclusive episode over on Epoch TV. If you would like to check out that exclusive episode over on Epoch TV, the link to it will be right there at the top of the description box. I hope you check it out, I hope you subscribe, and I hope that you join us on this journey of exploring this beautiful world through honest journalism that is based in truth and tradition. Now lastly, if you haven't already, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm, subscribe to this YouTube channel if you haven't already in order to get this type of honest news content delivered directly into your YouTube feed while YouTube still allows it. Also, if you have an Instagram account, follow me on Epoch Times Roman. And then, until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed and stay free.